It's beautiful, and you are watching Onward. I'm Adrianne Hamilton-Butler, your host, and today I have Dr. Spencer Murray. It's going to be a fabulous show. We're going to talk a lot about men's health and wellness, but before I get to Spencer, I just want to say again, welcome to Onward. Onward is a podcast that's dedicated to the strength and resiliency of the human spirit when faced with things that are unwanted, unexpected, uncertain, and it happens to all of us. And I've enjoyed having a myriad of guests who have shown a lot of strength in the things that they've encountered. This is our last show for 2022, so thank you for joining us. You're listening to Onward on the WCEG Network, WCEG Talk Radio. You can follow us now on your YouTube channel, on your smart TV at the WCEG Network. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Insta, and LinkedIn at WCEG Network or WCEG Talk Radio. WCEG is the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group. We are speaking life into the community. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this show are those of the host and our guest. So again, welcome to Dr. Spencer Murray. Thank you, Spencer, for joining us.
Thank you, Adrianne, for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
Okay, we lost Adrianne.
I see.
And if you would tell us who you are.
We'll be back. So, and while we're waiting for Adrianne to come back, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I think Adrianne mentioned that I kind of focus on men's health and wellness. I mean, that is certainly true, and that's been something I've been doing for years. Yeah, I mean, that holistic wellness, where you talk about physical wellness, spiritual wellness. As an educator, my background as an educator, and also working in spiritual spaces as a minister, much of my work has focused on healing, transformation, liberation, and then that work has taken me into working with men specifically as well. And so, yeah, many years of working just with men, period. And then as a teacher, for years in Detroit, Michigan, I had the opportunity to work with boys. I taught boys for about 5 years, all boys in the classroom in 5th grade. And the school I was at, Paul Robeson Academy, we established a mentorship program and had that. And so my work with boys and men has always been there for about 25, almost 30 years. And so certainly have my work has mirrored my own journey and my life. I'm sure we'll talk about that as well, but that fuels my passion to do what I do. I will say this now, in the latest iteration of my journey, I think I've worked in the spaces, violence prevention spaces. When you talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, sexual violence, not only educating the community about that, educating men about that, but also doing some intervention work with men who've somewhere on that spectrum of violence who have done harm. Also doing prevention work. And so going into juvenile centers or schools, and we'll go into churches and talk about changing the culture around to address this issue, and most importantly, helping men to look at their own ideas of masculinity and manhood, and how that has been how some of those ideas have been harmful and destructive to self first, and then to women, and then to the community. So that's the work I do in a nutshell, and that has spanned almost 30 years now.
So Spencer, you are not alone in this work. There are quite a few men and organizations that are involved in gender equality.
Sure.
And the prevention of gender-based violence. We have Men Stopping Violence.
That's right.
Here in the city of Atlanta. We also have Tony Porter with a call to men.
That's right.
We have Jackson Katz, Mentors and Violence and Prevention. And so you are just one of the many voices of men addressing this issue, and I thank you for that.
Yeah.
We even have one of your colleagues, Greg Laughlin, who recently did an op-ed in the Atlanta Journal and Constitution about men, the cost of not hearing women's voices.
That's right.
And so we really applaud you and the many others who are speaking up and really addressing kind of the historical kind of myth of how men should be, how they should present themselves in this world. I want to talk a little bit about your own background.
Sure.
Take me back to 18-year-old Spencer.
Wow.
And your own personal experience, your lived experience as a Black man, Black young man, growing up, and some of the things that you encountered that actually kind of brought you to this point.
Oh, definitely. Thanks for asking. That is part of the journey. I can't talk about 18 without talking about 17 too, and some of those experiences that led up into that point. And so when I connect my experience with what I do now and what I teach now and what I believe in now, I certainly grew up in a household that was not expressive at all as far as that affect, showing emotion. And it was a household that was mainly controlled by my dad. He was the voice in the household, the strict voice. And certainly he had his own issues, I think, of wellness. As I come look back in retrospect, he passed away when I was 18. But I would tell you his, there are, I've done the work that I needed to do, as most people do with their parents. There was some good and there was some not so good, right? But I believe he was he and the community I grew up in, of course, my first little peek into what manhood should look like. And so not only was the house non-expressive, as far as, expressing emotions, I love you, hugging, even touching, all those things. My father was not like that too, was certainly not like that. And the emotion that was expressed, Adrianne, was mainly anger and aggression. And so what I've come to learn, and what we've all come to learn in this work, is oftentimes in men and the way we're socialized, anger and aggression are the emotions that are accepted, not vulnerability, not talking about your feelings, not those things. And so that led up to, that was my experience. Then at 17, I had a older brother who was much older than me, who was out of the house by then, and he had his own experience in life that included incarceration, problems, drugs, things like that. Got killed, and when I was 17 in October of '82, and so my dad had lung cancer at that time. He had been, walking that journey, and by December of '82, 2 months later, he passed away from cancer, lung cancer, and certainly I saw him take a little dive, his health take a dive when my brother got killed. And so, that was, so at 18, at 17, I was experiencing things, 7 to 18, that my peers weren't.
Right.
They just weren't, but I kept it all inside. If anyone saw me, Adrianne, walking around in the class, they would not know that. Right. Because I didn't express that. I didn't have any, we didn't have any therapy. We didn't do that, So my experience, that was, I would say 17, 18, Adrianne, was pivotal in me embracing this, not showing emotion, having an air of indifference, all that, this introduction into manhood.
So I want to piggyback on that a little bit. You talked about how you didn't have therapy, how you kept a lot of things inside. And I just want to pull out a couple of stats.
Yes.
That in 2014, 80% of suicide deaths in the Black community were men.
Yeah.
80%.
Wow.
Black men do not recognize depression or trauma as an issue. So that means that Black men are more unlikely to get the help needed.
That's right.
To transition out of trauma.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're saying, is that as a 17-year-old, you experienced significant
Yes.
trauma in your life.
Yes.
But on the outside, you look very calm.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't
But
even know it was trauma.
exactly.
No,
Exactly. Right. And you were able to have that persona of being in control, but inside you were just feeling out of control,
that's correct.
sad,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to do this, how to live this life as a male.
Yes.
And you lost your male role model.
Yes. Yes. All those things.
So how did that show up? You went to college. How did that show up as you were going to college, trying to live this life,
Yes.
socialize, and be an African-American man?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all those things. And I, you know, and when you talk about Adrian being a Black man, my adolescent experience growing up in Detroit, particularly up until that age, until I went away to college, I was kind of insulated because Detroit is a 80%, 82% Black city.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so the schools I went to, the elementary, the middle school, the high school, it was all, so that's all I knew, right? And so it wasn't until I got to college that I was, you know, when you have those experiences, when you're made aware, okay, that you're a Black man.
Right.
You're a Black man, you have those experiences. But I will tell you, as I went to college, it affected me, and it certainly affected my relationships, because most people who you ask, and even ask then now, would say, hey, Spence is a nice guy. He's a nice guy. He's a cool guy. But I found it easier to be cool and nice and all that in friendships than relationships. And intimate partnerships is where it showed up oftentimes, is that I was oftentimes unable to express myself, my feelings,
Yes.
my emotions, and I'm talking about the intimacy. You know, they say that intimacy can mean into me see, you know what I mean? And so I had up this wall that, yeah, I was cool, but I wasn't, you didn't really know who, you're not really going to get to know who I am, and I'm not going to show that. And so, I remember being in relationships, Adrian, and I didn't even have the ability to hold hands in public. You know what I mean? I didn't have the ability to, to do that, because it was never expressed to me, and certainly I didn't know how to do it, and I did not see my experience as being wrong then. You know what I'm saying?
I was going to ask you about that.
I didn't see it as being wrong.
What was your awareness of the fact that you weren't able to be vulnerable?
Not until later in life, because if I was in a relationship with someone and they were requiring me to be vulnerable, or requiring me to be expressive, or requiring some type of emotion like that, I would push away from it. And it almost was like, wow, this expression of emotion that might be needed by this person is really some type of character fault with them. It's, you know what I mean? I didn't know how to do it. I did not know how to do it. And so it certainly affected my relationships. But I will tell you this too, Adrian, and you said it earlier, is that when relationships came to an end, or they didn't work because of that, inside I was just so confused. I didn't know why. I thought, I didn't think I was making any missteps, so to speak. If I'm a nice guy and I'm not doing, and we'll get into that, if I'm not a quote unquote violent guy, I'm a nice guy, I'm a nice guy. I didn't see that emotional withholding and all those things as causing harm. I didn't see those as harm. And so, yeah, it affected my experience. And I continued that when I got into college, and I continued to navigate my journey to be in spaces that continue to reinforce this this masculinity and manhood I had grown up with.
That's what I was going to ask you. So when you were talking about, kind of that inability to be
Yeah.
vulnerable,
Yeah.
was it from your own trauma and the fear of exposing yourself to more pain, or was it that traditional sense of manhood that you felt that you had to uphold?
I think it was a combination of both, because if I go back and I look at my experience growing up with my dad, mostly, dad and my mom, weren't as expressive, but certainly my dad, my experience with that is that as a young kid, because I don't think young kids are born. I don't think people are born like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think so. What I had to do as a young kid was learn how to navigate my dad's presence. And so him being a drinker and drinking a lot and be anger and aggression and everything he was dealing with, I had to navigate that. And so if I'm a young boy, or anybody has a young boy, sees a young boy crying and wanting to express emotions, what a 5 or 6 year old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old would do, if someone says, stop that crying, I'm really going to give you something to cry about if you don't stop that crying. If you don't stop that crying, I want you to man up. Then you begin to learn how to, that young boy begins to learn how to hide his emotions and how to navigate. So with my dad,
Wow.
moods would change. He would have moments of levity, moments of, he's a funny guy, humorous, he could play with you. But in the next moment, it was almost like he could be cursing you out, what I'm saying? And so it's like, I'm trying to navigate. And part of that navigation was shutting off my ability to feel, to protect myself. So yes, when you fast forward into relationships now, yes, my fear of doing that was my not wanting to be vulnerable, because I could be hurt, because you're going to expose yourself, because I don't want anybody to see it. But I've been taught that. Then, as you said, it is reinforced by the male experience, by the male socialization. It is certainly reinforced, because as you say, if 80% of men,
Yes.
then I came to learn later on in life that my experience is not unique.
Right.
It seems unique because men aren't talking about it.
Exactly.
Because men are in the space sharing and talking about this.
Right.
But I thought it was unique.
Right. Exactly. So what's interesting to me is that, you grew up with this experience, you were starting to get in touch with it a little bit when you were in college, but then you went on to become a teacher.
I did.
An elementary and middle school teacher in Detroit, teaching primarily boys.
I did.
So tell us a little bit about that experience and what you brought with you from your own childhood, your own lived experience. How did that translate?
It did. It certainly translated. I remember before I taught all boys, I began teaching first grade, and that was boys and girls. And I taught first grade for about 4 or 5 years, first grade. And so I could see right then, and I think most teachers, who work, particularly working with smaller kids, they might bring their experience into how they're going to be a teacher.
Yes.
As far as discipline and your affect in the classroom and your control in the classroom and trying to do that, which by the way, never really works, but that's what you try to do. But I began to see myself in these little children. I told people back then, I had a chance to write for a newsletter. The first year I became a teacher was a school newsletter in 1992. And I remember saying, becoming a teacher saved my life. It really saved my life, because when you begin to give back and when you begin to teach children, you see yourself in them.
Yes.
You see yourself in that experience. And it was so much more. Being in that classroom with children was so much more than teaching the subjects of arithmetic and social studies and writing, but to see myself in those experiences. So I have to believe that my journey was navigated for me to, for me to be in that classroom and see that. And certainly that was it. And then when I transitioned and began to teach boys, I really began to see I really began to see myself. And now when you're talking about the experience of being with young 5-year-old students, right? And then all of a sudden you move to 10 and 11-year-old students. I can see because some of the students I had in first grade, I
Yeah.
had in fifth grade too.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I could see them grow. I can see how they go. And I could see, and I always had this, Adrian, I always had a desire to observe and interrogate things and see the connections of things and want to look at myself. So I can begin to see how messages from childhood affect, as you grow up. And I begin to see myself that, you know what? That 10-year-old boy, those 10-year-old boys that I had, that 10-year-old boy is still trapped inside of me. And
Exactly.
at that point, I was 26, 27 years old teaching, and really could see in that, I think at that point, that was my beginning of really asking some questions of myself spiritually, asking questions of God, you know what I mean? Asking questions and that really, and those answers began to come. So I would say the early mid 90s was it, but I saw myself in those boys. I also know that the journey of mentoring boys, that
Yes.
when I began to mentor boys, I can look back now and say that part of my mentoring was also could be unhealthy because it was teaching them how to be man up.
Right. How
You
you grew up.
yeah,
Exactly.
a man needs to man up. You need to shake
Yes.
hands. You need to look in the guy's eyes. You need to be accountable. You need to be responsible. And all those things are true, but man up. And so I think for me, my initial interaction with boys of that age and all boys was still a little bit devoid of compassion and express your feelings and tell how you feel. You know what I mean?
Right.
And not recognizing, though, again, that 80% of men not recognizing that when you suppress so much, it can become illness and sickness and
Yes.
isolation and depression. And in my experience, as with many men, that tension that I felt, I began to numb at a certain point in my life. I began to numb that feeling with drinking
Yes.
and partying, experimenting with drugs, doing those things, which, you think, hey, those the college experience, you have fun. But I also knew I was abnormally using it. That's what I call abuse. The two words, abnormal use, abuse. To abuse that, to also numb the feeling.
That's
and
right.
escape and almost run away from myself, Adrian, because I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see.
I want to go back a little bit
Sure.
to the teaching in the boys, right?
Yeah.
Because part of what our young boys exhibit comes from the home.
Yes.
But there's also some systemic things that are going on. In the schools, there's this zero tolerance kind of approach to discipline, right? And so we know what that does to our boys in school. And so what it really does is when they exhibit behavioral challenges, it pushes them out of the educational system.
That's right.
And we talk a lot about the prison pipeline, right? Yeah. Especially at how it impacts our boys.
Yeah.
And so schools are punitive rather than trauma informed.
Exactly.
So they're coming from a home, some are coming from a home environment, where it's like, squash your feelings, man up.
Right.
And then you go into a school environment where you're seen as an other.
Right.
And you're treated harshly because you're active or you're questioning.
Yes.
I'll talk a little bit about what you saw with young boys, because I think where you taught was majority African-American Black.
Yeah.
Talk about how you saw the young boys being treated in school and how that kind of impacted them as they were growing up.
Well, thanks. Certainly the first school I taught at Pearl Robeson Academy was an African-centered academy. And so if you were to talk to those students now that I had in first grade who are like 35 and 36 years old, they will talk about how wonderful the experience was. I mean, I can talk about my mentoring of boys and some of, but that school was a school that was some of the things we did.
Yes.
Harambe, which was a Swahili word meaning let's come together. We did it every day. We did affirmations. We did things that were, we centered their experience. We centered the African experience and still educated, right? And so and we learned how to nurture and have compassion. So that school was different. But as you're saying, I've seen in my educational experience, there are educators in the classroom who don't understand how Black boys learn. They don't understand, and they certainly don't understand the Black experience, you know what I mean? And so they don't understand that in a classroom, right, that boys typically have a need to move around, to touch, to talk, to do that. That's part of their learning. But if you don't understand that, you will punish that, right? Because the teacher is in the classroom trying to control the classroom.
Exactly.
So it's teacher-centered rather than student-centered.
Right.
And then you see the suspensions go up and up and up and up. And it is a systemic thing because you talk about my last year teaching 8th grade. In my last year teaching 8th grade in a school, I had 41 8th graders. That's 41 students in one classroom.
Wow.
25 boys, 16 girls. And so we have to be careful. And I'm glad you asked about this because oftentimes the system creates the conditions for that to happen.
Yes.
Now, how was a teacher, and I love teaching. I think teaching is the most honorable, noble profession there is. But how is a teacher how are you going to charge a teacher with teaching a certain thing and reaching certain objectives? And they have 35 children in their classroom,
right,
who coming from experiences like I had, or coming even worse, you know what I mean? And then suspend them and operate in this punitive fashion, a fashion that is mirroring, as you said, the school to prison pipeline, because these are systems. So we can't address this issue with men's healing and wellness without also being aware and transforming the system. You see, this is why schools now, I just finished yesterday, was my last day of restorative justice training, you know? And so there are these movements to, which you see in the criminal legal system as well, to move away from this punitive approach, because if we're doing that in our schools, we're doing nothing but imitating that system.
Exactly.
And imitating and preparing, right? And labeling and preparing our students for that.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because, basically we're looking at our children through some type of lens of not, like you said, how we learn, which is more tactile, very openly curious, but more as just having a behavioral issue.
Behavioral issue. And then labeling, you got so many labels now. Many labels now that I can't even name.
Right.
That I think the root of them it is a mental, as we're talking about mental health, and mental wellness, because there is no separation, Adrianne. And this is part of what we can be taught as well, and certainly systems do that. There should be no separation between the mental, the psychological, the spiritual, all those things. But when we separate those things, then we kind of take out the spiritual. And I'm not talking about prayer in schools. I'm not just talking about that. I'm not just talking about I'm talking about addressing the whole being of a person.
Yes.
Because you don't have to, you know what I mean? Teachers, I've heard people for years say, things start going wrong when they took prayer out of the school. Any good teacher will tell you, any good teacher, particularly teachers who are steeped in their own faith, and they're still teachers, they will tell you that when I go into that classroom and close the doors, it's me and the kids, that I take the Spirit of God with me, whatever I call that to be. I take that with me, and it comes out in the way I teach.
Exactly. That's right.
That comes out in the way I teach. But yeah, those systems have to be transformed, dismantled, built up again. We have to do that as well, because I only learned what I learned at home, and my dad and his dad and everybody else learned it from the system of what manhood should be, and that is often taught. That is not oftentimes our indigenous ways. That's often taught by an environment that we live in, that has taught us what manhood should be. And if we're disconnected from our true self, because I say all the time, when you talk about no harm, that a man who really knows who he is, really knows himself, really knows who he is, will not do harm. He will not do that, but and that's that's my mission. That's what I want to do,
Right. Because
yeah.
the struggle really, as you're talking about doing no harm,
Yes.
when you do harm to others, it really isn't about them.
Yeah.
It's about the struggle within.
It is.
And you talked about the Spirit.
Yeah.
You went on. Was this after you were teaching that you went to New York Theological Seminary?
Right. So I went to New York Theological Seminary once I moved here to Georgia. I left Detroit, Michigan in 2011 and moved here. And by the time 2012 got here, 2012, near the end of 2012, 2013 is when I enrolled in New York Theological Seminary. Now, during the course of my experience in the 90s, in the latter 90s, I actually began to seek ministry. And so I began in different spaces. I became a minister and studied for that. So that was a part of my experience, my journey from being an educator and a minister and doing this work with men. That was, about spiritual growth as well, and spiritual identity and all those things. But then when I moved here, I really wanted to increase that work. And someone came and told me, I had some people that I met, one thing leads to another, and they had been professors at a seminary, and they were doing some ministry work here, and told me about a program at New York Theological Seminary that they were starting called Conflict Transformation.
Yes.
And so now, right, I had this ministry that I'd been part of for 25 years. But now, when I heard, Adrianne, the term conflict transformation,
yes,
I was like, oh, that's for me. Because that's what my life is about. That's what it's about. How can we, because by that time, Adrianne, I really began to, you mentioned the word lens. I began to see through a different lens.
Yes.
I up to then, I hadn't seen through the lens of women. I hadn't seen through the lens of Black women. I'd seen life through my own lens and my own experiences. And so that's how I interpreted them. So conflict transformation. So I want to know why, what's the deal? What am I bringing to relationships? It's not about always the other person. What self am I bringing to relationships, and why?
Right.
And you keep asking the universe, you keep asking why, you get the answers. And so the conflict transformation was about, how can I become better instead of bitter? How can I look at myself and use this tension to become better? And that's what conflict transformation was about. Not only couples in tension, but countries in tension, institutions that are in tension, corporations that go into that tension and use certain skills to identify the tension.
Yes.
Transform the people in the tension by compassionate listening, by this, it's, those skills. So that was for me, because it was about my life. And so that began my conflict transformation. And that was my introduction. You mentioned Men Stopping Violence. That is part of my experience. You know,
Yeah.
being there at some point, I learned a lot from them. I'm not at the organization anymore, but it's part of my experience. And so I was introduced to them as I introduced to this whole way of learning now about male socialization, because here's the thing, and this is the last thing I'll say on this part, because I know you've got some questions, is that me, and I think many men, and I try to tell the men when well, not try, but I do tell the men when I go into jails, juvenile centers, whatever those are, that you are not inherently bad.
Right.
You know, your struggles, your tension, is
Yes.
not, you weren't born this way, and neither, that there is also a system
Yes.
that has externally imposed upon you what you should be and who you should be. And when you realize that's external, then you realize I can change those. I can change that. But if you believe, you know, in a system that, and I'll say this, you know, I say it, you know, I know it's my belief, it's not the belief of the radio station or you, but if you grow up in a system, particularly religious system, that also is about shaming you or driving you into guilt and shame, then you can be stuck in that trauma. You can be stuck in that I'm bad and I'm good, because we've created this dichotomy of bad and good. And so man, that is a dark hole that men and everybody else, and women too, can go down trying to live up to expectations.
It is. It really is. And we all know, I mean, God is not a God of guilt or shame.
Yeah.
So he's a redemptive
Exactly.
God and a compassionate and loving God. But what we have done, especially in our Western culture,
Yes.
is we have turned that into
Yes.
kind of this, you know, it's all about our sin and our
Yes.
guilt and our shame,
Yes.
and nothing that allows us to be free.
That's right.
To be who we are and to
Right.
express ourselves
That's right.
as full, complete spiritual human beings.
That's right.
You talk a lot too about being an inclusive minister. You're in inclusive ministry. Talk a little bit about what it means, because it's not just ministry.
Yeah.
I like how you use the word inclusive.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
It means that there is no separation in who. When I think of God, when I think of spirit, when I think of that, I think that there, at the end of the day, for me, when I talk about spirit, then there is no male, female. There is no black. There is spirit. There is spirit, and we've created these labels. We've created labels of gender orientation, sexual orientation, color,
Right.
ethnicity, class, all those things. And so inclusive means there's nobody locked out. There's nobody locked out from, you know, I don't want to start preaching, you know, there's nobody locked out from the goodness, you know, there's no one locked out from the truth.
Right.
Locked out for that. Do we have to do work to get there together? Yes, we have to do some, and we have to be about truth telling too, which is a pillar of what I'm doing. We have to be about truth telling as people, to ourselves, personally accountable, and as institutions, religious, we have to be about truth telling to get back to that inclusion. That leads everything I do. So everyone I meet, you know, everyone I encounter, everyone that comes to my space, my intention is to have open arms, to say welcome. Everybody is welcome. It's just like a church or a spiritual community that says everybody is welcome.
Exactly.
You know, everybody's welcome. There's no, you know, but again, back to the separation, it's easy to believe, people who are really attached and believe in certainty, you know, believe in the certainty of their religion or the certainty of their God. You know, it can breed this, my God is better than yours. This is the true religion. That's the true, you know, yours is the false religion. And so it breeds separation, and that separation can breed violence, competition, and all those things, which worldly and Western constructs as well.
Well, and so you're kind of bringing up this thing that I was listening to Tony Porter one time, and he was talking about othering.
Yeah.
You know, how we other people, right? So when you're looking at gender-based violence, that happens because men other women, you know, women are not seen as equal, they're seen as others.
That's right.
For some, you know, Black people are seen as others.
Yes.
And so it's easy to perpetrate violence or to associate stereotypes with people when they are not a part of who you are, a part of your community.
That's right.
And so really your work, even with no harm, is about showing that there is this gender equality.
That's right.
But it's based on the fact that men have to let go of those traditional stereotypes of manhood.
That's right.
Not that you're not man, but understanding that you can be vulnerable, you can be open, you can talk about your feelings.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about what led you to no harm.
So seeing the work and coming into the work of violence against women and educating and doing that work as well, I noticed too that there is a temptation to other somebody in that space.
Yes.
And so when there's a temptation, while we know we have to do so much for victims and survivors, we know that, but there's also a temptation to other the perpetrator.
Yes, and that is very true.
Yeah, to other the perpetrator, in a sense where, and I'm not saying that everybody shouldn't be held accountable. There is no question about accountability. But when accountability is weaponized, then what happens, the perpetrator can become demonized.
Right.
And if you demonize the perpetrator, you don't see any redemptive value in him. Then you come back to the system. Then you come back to the use of the system to remove that man from the community to do. And certainly there are some we know. Let's not say there's some that need to be removed from situations and rehabilitated and taught and all those things. But when you demonize an other, then the dangers, you can create systems of that. If we really want to eliminate this violence, if we really want to reduce this harm, if we really want to do it, how can we eliminate men from this equation? How can we only be about victims and survivors without bringing men and engaging men and healing men? And exactly. I started realizing, Adrianne, that, you know what, if men are the primary perpetrators, which they are, if men are committing suicide at the rates you talked about from 2014, if men are the primary perpetrators, if young boys are the primary mass shooters that we see around, and no one wants to talk about why, you know what I mean? Right. Not nationally anyway. And we need to be working with we need to be working with men and boys. We need to heal them. You know what I mean? We need to work with men and boys and engage them into the work of violence prevention, you know? And
so with the 15 minutes and that we have left, I want to talk about that because, you know, the whole, how do we help young boys and men to heal from trauma that basically a lot of it happened during childhood? Yeah. Talk about some of the things that your organization is doing and talk about ways that men can reach out to begin the healing process for themselves.
Sure. Well, since I've been doing this work for a while now, as you know, I was doing the work in kind of contracting and doing work in spaces of, always doing work, going in spaces of schools and listening to boys and teaching boys early about healthy masculinity and talking about them, starting with themselves first, right? Because at an early age, men and boys are taught to start other themselves. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So if you suppress what we've assigned to women, which is vulnerability, emotions, if you suppress all that, right, then boys are at that early age divorcing themselves from half of themselves.
Yes.
They're divorcing themselves because what makes them human is all of that. And so I go in, and my intention is to teach boys to access all of themselves. And when you learn to access all of yourself, that includes the vulnerability, all that. And then the othering doesn't even start within.
Yes.
The othering doesn't start within. And Adrianne, let me say this. I believe it is possible, and I'm not saying this as a rule. I believe it is possible for boys who grow up to be men, but from boys. If you suppress what is feminine, what you consider to be feminine so much, it begins it can morph into self-hatred, because you're divorcing yourself from half of yourself. Then when you want to express those things, when you want to cry, when you see someone else crying, you beat them down because you've been taught to not do that.
Right, not to
You
feel
see
that
someone
emotion.
else do that. Yeah, not to feel that
Yes.
emotion. And you see someone else do it, and you say, you're not a man. Or you have this self-talk in your head, you're not a man, man up. And so that becomes violent, because we have all type of things. We have homophobia, we have all type of things that
Yes.
you know what I mean, that can morph from this self-hatred. So the first order of business is to teach boys about themselves, and then to see how that indoctrination, or how that socialization that you learned was violent to yourself and violent to people, girlfriends or young ladies you're being in a relationship with. So it's a program of doing that. So I do have a curriculum that I'm still, I still am working. It still evolves, because Uncover, Recover, Discover.
Yes.
So Uncover, Recover, Discover is that process. Let's uncover first what we've been hiding, because our secrets keep us sick. When you talk about our families and my dad and his dad, the secrets keep us sick. Not wanting, we don't want to go to therapy. We don't want to do that. We want to handle ourselves. We want to push it all down and keep it secret. We can't never heal. We continue to hide. We can never do that. And so we can't have this. So mine is to use myself as a conduit, and use my experience to say, I'm with you, that I've been there too, and let's talk about this, and let's go through a journey of self-discovery that starts from there. And do the same with men. But of course, with men, we have to, talk about releasing that trauma and that guilt and shame. Because if a man is 30, 40, 50 years old, he might have more experiences, and being a Black man and a black woman can be a traumatic experience in itself in America for many. You know what I mean? And so we have to uncover all those things, and then recover, and then discover a new way of being. And I come back to that word, oneness. So with Tony Porter and many others, and I talk about too, this othering. The opposite of othering is oneness.
Yeah.
Oneness. That how I treat you is how I treat myself. Adrianne, what I do to you, I do to there is a oneness. We have to do a lot of work to get back there. But healing is possible, as my friends in Detroit at Sasha always say, healing is possible.
So I just want to take a moment, the holidays are approaching, and that can be a very difficult time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it can be a difficult time for men sometimes, because, you have fathers who are trying to provide for their children. You can have relationships that are broken, and they want to heal or come back together. What kind of self-care, one, would you recommend for men? And then two, what would you also recommend for men who are seeking to rebuild relationships, whether it's with their children, their significant others, so that healing can begin?
Yeah. I was well, self-care for men. I think first we have to talk to other men. We have to reveal, we have to be in spaces where we talk to other men. And we are so isolated sometimes in the spaces by ourselves, and think we're by ourselves because we don't do that. There is nothing more powerful than men coming together and talking about their experience and sharing that. I'm just fortunate that I can be able to cry, I can be able to laugh, I can be able to do that with a couple of friends of mine and be able to do that. But men have to be able to do that. I would say, in the absence of finding someone to do that, because I believe if you ask for that, you will be led to it. Ask and you shall receive. I believe that. I believe you can start writing in your journal. I write in my journal. I just write, write everything out. I do breathing exercises. If there's I do breathing exercises. I go to the gym. I work out. I do all these things. I just was telling people the other day, we were in another session, talking about discovering who you are and creating a value system for yourself, because you and I and other, we have boundaries. The way we know what our boundaries are, because first of all, we know that those boundaries have been crossed in prior, in prior years, but we create our boundaries by creating a value system. What do you value?
Yes.
I value honesty. I value love. I value compassion. I value transparency. I value this. Then I can create boundaries for myself. And it really is investing in a program of learning who you are and self-discovery.
Right. Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. I can't say that for men. There's books, there's, self-awareness. And slowly recognizing, with that awareness, you can start being absent from spaces that are operating in this unhealthy masculinity, being absent. And I really believe, and certainly my experience, right, is that you're talking about presence and absence. We put a lot of emphasis on present. Let's be present. Yeah, let's be present. But certainly I believe your absence can send a greater message than your presence, particularly if you're in spaces that you don't need to be in, or that keep reinforcing.
Yes.
To be able to say, I'm going to be absent from that. I'm not going to be with them anymore, because men, there's that group thing. You can think one thing, but then when you get in a group of men that are exhibiting unhealthy masculinity, you can activate that which is already in you. And so I would say particularly a program of spiritual self-awareness, who you are.
Yes.
Who you are. I couldn't do it without that, Adrianne. I really couldn't do it without that. But one that helps you take that journey inside and continue to ask the questions. Continue to ask the questions, and I think you will live your way into the answers. And so that's some of the self-care. For men, I was just reading this, I know we only got a couple of minutes left. I was just reading this morning again about this ancient Hawaiian technique called Ho'oponopono. I don't know if you heard of it. I don't know if you talked about it before. Ho'oponopono is a simple healing technique that is, the intention is to bring balance back. And people can do that with each other, and people can do that to themselves. And I will say this, and I think it's a good way for me to stop, because I can talk all day, Adrianne. Ho'oponopono is simply 4 statements. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And I love you.
Wow. I'm trying to look this up because I want to see if we can share it.
Yeah. It's H-O. Then there's an apostrophe. Then it's O-P. Then it's Opono, like it sounds.
Oh, I see.
Apostrophe.
Yes.
O-P.
I found it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's.
I want to share this.
Yeah. It's I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And I love you. And those 4 statements, if someone just does that 7 to 10 times with themselves, you know what I mean, with themselves, it really is something that can foster healing within,
Yes.
and with each other too. And read, I'd encourage everybody to read about that. And that's the 4 simple techniques, but they're said with, of course, with all of your being. You know, it's not just something just to say. You say that with all of your being, and it is a healing technique. And
Well,
that's
say that. So say the 4 things one more time, because I
okay.
was looking it up and.
Okay. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you.
That's powerful.
It is very powerful, and it is a healing technique. It's a forgiving technique. It brings balance back. And I believe that anyone can start doing that with themselves now. Because when you talk about guilt and shame, you talking about all those things. Forgive yourself, you know.
I was just going to say that you are absolutely right.
Yes.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
That it begins with forgiving ourselves.
It does.
And also forgiving others who have hurt us in the past.
Right.
Especially for those of us who are older, because I think men and women, when we hold on to past hurts, it keeps us from moving forward.
It does.
I want to thank you. I'm the mom of 2 men.
Yeah.
My husband and I raised these 2 amazing sons. And we think a lot about them, especially growing up and being Black in this world and what that means and the pressure. All people feel pressure, but I think we underestimate the pressure that a lot of our Black men feel.
Yeah, we do.
To perform in the business environment, to perform in school, the athletic field.
Yeah.
So really helping them to know that they're supported.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that is a process that starts within, and we must encourage our boys and our men to start within, because it pains me to know that men are hurting. It pains me to know that Black men are hurting. It also pains me to see many Black men attempting to live up to an idea of success or an idea that someone else created.
Yes.
That is devoid of your inner being and your inner faculties, and that's what men are taught, to just these external things will define my success, so it all starts within. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Spencer, for this time. Thank you for your wisdom. Again, your organization is No Harm. I want to thank WCEG for allowing me the space to be with people like Spencer, who are helping people to heal. Yeah. It's the holiday season. Be blessed, everyone. I will see you in 2023, God willing. And thank you, Penny Rogers, for all that you do. You are awesome. This is Onward. Yeah. And as I end always, Gottarun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer.
It's a wrap. Powerful, powerful, powerful.
Good wrap.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny.
It's an honor.
Be in touch. Thank you, Adrianne. You all have a wonderful weekend. Happy holidays to you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Spencer. Thank you, Penny.
Okay. I'll see you soon, Adrianne. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.